Today, we're going to focus on something very specific. I teach what I call, once someone learns the framework of a story and the purpose, I teach something called the Sizzlers. So what makes that story really sizzle? And I have 9 Sizzlers. And today, we're just going to focus on one single Sizzler, and we're going to explore that in depth. But before I do that, I do want to give a little bit of an overview that might help you to choose what stories, when to tell, and how. And here's what helps me to make sure that my stories have a purpose. And so I have 4 questions that you may ask yourself when you decide to tell a story, whether it's in a negotiation, a conversation, a presentation, a speech. Any of those are opportunities. Even in one-on-one relationship building, we have an opportunity to tell a story. So a very powerful story does one of these 4 things, and you'll kind of see a theme as I share them. One is, what belief is challenged with your story? So your listener or your audience believes one way, and your story will challenge that belief. Now, stories are a really powerful way to get people to open up their minds and see things differently. If we just try to tell people what we know and tell people what we believe, then they feel like we're trying to tell them that they're wrong. And what we're really asking folks to do is to look at things through a different lens. Stories have the power to do that. So that's a one big picture reason to tell a story. And ask yourself this about your story. What belief is being challenged? All right, number 2, another big reason is, what problem is being solved? This is typically very specific to business, but even in relationships, if someone comes to us and they share that they have a problem, a powerful way to be helpful is to, rather than tell them what we think they should do or advise them, we would share an experience, a story where we solved a similar problem. That shows somebody that we're listening and that we understand. Okay, number 3, what myth is being busted? I use this one a lot to open up speeches. I'll make a statement that everyone seems to nod their head to. Like, one of my favorites is, everything happens for a reason. I do not believe that. And I will share a story that busts that myth. So that's another great reason to tell a story. And the 4th one is, what expectation is being surpassed? Again, this is really powerful in business. If someone expects, let's just say you are a realtor, they expect a certain experience. You can share a story. Rather than telling someone that you're going to surpass their expectations, you can show them by sharing a story. So those are 4 big questions, and just choose one, and that will help you to choose stories, experiences that will have purpose and bring you the results you desire. So I'll review those. What belief is being challenged? What problem is being solved? What myth is being busted? Or what expectation is being surpassed? When you choose to do that, then you can use a story framework. There is one that I teach, but there are several. And then I share something called, as I mentioned, Sizzlers. And it's these little nuances that take a story from good to unforgettable. These Sizzlers take a story from good to unforgettable. And we are just going to talk about one of the 9 Sizzlers that I teach. And it is this: appeal to the senses. Smell, sound, and sight specifically. We can do a little bit on touch, but when you first craft your story, don't worry about this. Then review it and figure out how you can appeal to people's senses. This helps bring a story to life. So in the terms of writers, rather than telling somebody a story, you want to show them. You want them to be able to actually forget where they are, forget that they're listening to someone talk, or forget that they're reading, and find themselves lost in your story. The most powerful way to do that is by appealing to the senses. So let's break this down, because I love this stuff. And if you have questions, comments, please feel free to interrupt me. But let's talk about smell. If you think about this, smell, aromas, scents, they can trigger emotions, they can trigger memories, and they can build suspense. Oftentimes, when we're telling a story, we forget to just mention, it just takes a couple words about what we are smelling. And a lot of times that can really bring a story to life. I'll give you a secret that I learned. This is in my neuroscience world. There is one scent that every single human likes the smell of. Most smells, some will say yes, some will say no, but this is in our biology. There's actually one smell that we all hate, but I don't think I've ever smelled it. And there's one that we all love. The one that we hate is the smell, this is gross, of a decaying body. So that does not apply to this, but there is one scent that all humans love, and that smell is vanilla. That is built in us to help us to latch on and breastfeed as a baby, and it never leaves us. So if you ever find someone who says they don't like the smell of vanilla, I'm willing to bet that there is a bad memory attached to that smell. So interesting little piece, little tidbit. All right, but let's talk about smell. In all of these, the more specific we can get, the more powerful the words are. So for example, if we said, I walked into the house and I smelled a pie baking, that's okay, right? But what if you said, I walked into the house and I smelled cinnamon and apples wafting from the kitchen? See, so the brain can really latch on to cinnamon and apples baking more than just a pie. So once we pick the smell, then we want to get more and more and more specific. There's a piece in my book where we are sitting at a rodeo. So rather than just starting the paragraph or the chapter saying, I'm at a rodeo, I talk about the smell of leather, tobacco, hot dogs, and manure. Think about that. Leather, tobacco, hot dogs, and manure. All those things mixed together is what I call the aroma of rodeo, or the symphony of rodeo, part of it. So again, remember the smell. Rather than saying, I woke up and smelled breakfast cooking, I think you know what I'm going to say here. I woke up and I smelled vanilla, coffee, and bacon. I smelled dinner. I walked in the house and I smelled our dinner cooking. It's okay, right? But what if you said I walked into the house and I could smell garlic and onions? Now, this is going to lead us into the second sense that I want to talk about, and that is sound. Again, sound has the power to trigger memories. But interestingly, and I want you guys to remember this, interestingly, it's not as powerful as smell. But sound is also important. What did I hear? And I'm going to share some examples about how we can get really specific with sounds. So I walked into the house, the smell of garlic and onions, and I could hear the sizzling, right? So not only did you smell garlic and onions, but you could hear them sizzling. Does that make you feel cozy? So as I mentioned, in the world, especially of writing, there's a saying, and it's very hard to do, but it is constantly a skill that we hone, and it is to show, don't tell. You've probably heard it, show, don't tell. If I say I walked into their home, I smelled garlic and onions, and I could hear them sizzling, it feels cozy, right? So the reason for this, as opposed to I walked in and it immediately felt cozy, is you can't see that. You can't smell it, you can't hear it, you can't feel it, you can't lose yourself in that. So if you want to say to a listener, it felt cozy in their home, push yourself to say what made it feel cozy. And one of those examples could be the smell of garlic and onions sizzling from the kitchen, right? You don't need to ever say it felt cozy. You can just share what you experienced as specific as you possibly can. That brings the story to life. So I'd like to give just a few other examples because, as I mentioned, this is a skill to practice. But if you have a story that you're going to tell from a microphone or in a presentation or in a negotiation, this is where practice matters. This is where practice matters. Remembering these key phrases that bring the story to life. Okay, so how about this one? Usually in workshops, we'll have some fun with this and people will chime in, so feel free to. But I heard a car pull up. That's okay, right? I mean, then we have to kind of think about the sound of a car. Or you could say, all of a sudden, I heard a muffler humming. See the difference? You can really hear a muffler humming. If you hear a car, is it screeching? Is it idling? You don't know. I heard a muffler humming. That lets you know that a car is sitting outside. How about a band? It could be a rap band. It could be a jazz band. It could be any type of band. To say that I heard a band far off playing music is very nondescript. It's somewhat abstract. And we want to be as concrete as we possibly can. So I might want to say, I heard a bass guitar wailing. That's where we can challenge ourselves. Rather than I heard a band, I heard a bass guitar wailing. Do you feel the difference? You can almost feel that. At least I can. Let's do one more. Let's talk about a crowd. I've read these words before. I heard the crowd cheering. It's okay. What if you heard you heard stomping and chanting the word encore? I heard a crowd stomping and chanting encore. So much more powerful than I heard a crowd cheering. And there's one other piece of the senses that I'm going to throw in here, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because I really want to get into sight. But if you were to hear a crowd stomping and chanting the word encore, what other sense might you throw in there? What might you feel? You might feel the ground tremor, right? So don't forget about the sense of feeling. It's a little bit more challenging to incorporate. And what I don't want you to take away from this is that you have to give all the senses to every single story. It could be so overloaded that the brain, the listener says, okay, where are we going with this? The less words you can use, the more powerful the story and the more clear and descriptive. The easiest way to challenge yourself with your words is, can I see this word? And that's what we're going to go to next, is see. Actually, I forgot one more piece about listening, and I don't want to step over this one. And I'm going to give you an example. Especially powerful in writing and speaking is, rather than saying what someone said, for example, my son told me it was Caroline, and I'm taking this just an example straight from my book. Instead of saying my son told me it was Caroline, I want to encourage you, when it makes sense, to use dialogue. That really helps the listener to lose themselves in your story. Dialogue. So rather than saying, when I was asking my son what was bothering him, what was hurting him, rather than saying he told me it was his sister Caroline, I said something like, as his lip quivered, he caught his breath and he uttered one word, Caroline. Do you feel the difference? So again, when there's a really powerful moment in the story, give the dialogue to the person that's speaking instead of saying, they told me, they said that. Just they said, comma, and give it dialogue. All right, so those are some sounds that really help to bring stories to life. And the last one, which is where I want to spend really the most time on, is what I mentioned before, is, can you see this? Can I see what's happening? And if we can't see it, then we have some work to do. And one of the ways that we can do that is to use very clear action verbs. Is, rather than saying, I walked slowly, it's okay. First of all, I walked. It's okay. At least it's better. At least there's an action verb there. But was I darting? Was I dashing? Was I skipping? Was I running? Was I ambling? Was I sauntering? Rather than saying, I slowly walked or I walked slowly, find the word that means walk slowly. It's so much more powerful. It's shorter and it's clearer. I ambled, I sauntered, for example. So if you can, eliminate adverbs to find a word that really clearly says what the person is doing, it is much more powerful. But what if we never told the audience that I was so happy and that I got the job? What if I just said something to the effect of, my eyes landed on the email, I clicked, and with that, I closed my laptop, cranked up Beyonce, and sang into my ink pen, Girls, We Run the World. Everybody knows I got the job, if that's part of the story, right? Everybody knows that you got the job without ever saying, I'm so happy I got the job. I closed my computer, picked up my ink pen, and twerked to Beyonce, singing Girls, We Rule the World. That's a really clear visual. So let me do a little review, and then if y'all have questions, comments, more examples, I could do this all day long, but I want to remind you, first, big picture, ask yourself one of these 4 questions, and there you have a powerful story. If you can answer one of these, what belief is being challenged? What problem is being solved? My favorite, what myth is being busted? Or what expectation is being surpassed? So rather than saying, I want to change minds, you are challenging beliefs, solving problems, busting myths, and surpassing expectations. Got it? You are challenging beliefs, solving problems, busting myths, surpassing expectations. And once you have a good, strong framework for your story, there are a lot of ways to make that story sizzle. And today we just talked about one sizzler, and that is to appeal to the senses, particularly smell, sound, and sight.